We welcome everyone here in our sanctuary and also virtually to the memorial service for Thomas Tom Gordon, a blessed memory. Come together as an act of love, a memorial, and a celebration of his life. As we often do in Jewish and Christian traditions, we turn to the Psalms at the beginning, and we're going to turn to one of the most beloved of Psalms, Psalm 23. Cantor Arlene Frank is going to begin with the singing of it, and then we'll chant it in English as well.
Adonai brovi lo echsar v'odeshem yarbetzeni armei beruchot yenam haleini nafshi yishavev yancheni v'magadlei tzente yancheni v'magadlei tzedek leman shemo gam kirek v'kitzar bavet u'irara ki ata imadi shivteka u'bisantecha hima inachamuni Adonai roi lo echsar Adonai roi lo echsar.
Please join with me if you're familiar. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We're going to be hearing reflections from the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. These are from colleagues of Tom's, or friends of Tom's, that will be read by the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So our first speaker is going to be Sarah Kaifus. I'd like to invite you up to the mic over here.
I first met Tom in 1983 when the American Association of Physics Teachers hosted their very first high school physics teachers summers conference. Teachers applied for the conference from across the country, and approximately 60 teachers were accepted. Tom was selected from New York, and I was another from Philadelphia, and I was ecstatic to be accepted into this first conference hosted in Princeton. On the first night of the conference, Tom became the center of attention as he beautifully rewrote everyone's name tags in calligraphy. At the end of the conference, Tom was selected as a physics teaching resource agent on the first team of 4 teachers to go out the following summer to different areas of the country for a week at a time to spread the word about teaching physics. These teachers did nothing the whole time except demonstrate how to teach physics. It was a big job and Tom loved it. He would call me up and tell me funny things that would happen. It was just up his alley. Meanwhile, when he wasn't doing physics, he was making up games or gadgets you could play with for amusement at home or while you were traveling. He affixed magnets or Velcro to the game so pieces would stay in place in a moving vehicle. Tom was a huge collector of stuff that he might be able to use in a game. If he saw you had a collection of blocks, magnets, etc., he would think of some kind of game to use those things and would write it up in case you wanted to play with them at some time. In 2004, I was in a monster traffic accident. I woke up one day in the hospital and noticed Tom moving furniture. He had driven down from New York to make sure I was okay. After this accident, I retired and stopped participating in as many physics meetings. However, I would still see Tom and talk to him on the phone. I talked to Tom a few times a week since meeting him, so we had almost 40 years of conversations. Tom was a great friend and a lot of fun. He was always willing and ready to help, always had a solution to any problem, and he surely will be missed by friends, family, and physics associates. Liz Chesnick.
I'd like to invite up Joe Atkinson for a reading. It is a fearful thing.
It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing to love what death has touched.
For the next reflection, I'd like to bring up Kate Gordon.
Many years ago, I was on the phone with a physics teacher from Stanford High School in California. Somehow, the conversation turned to a convention of physics teachers where Tom was presenting. Since she knew I was a physics teacher at the Bronx Science, she asked if I knew this brilliant teacher who both dazzled and baffled an entire reception hall full of physics teachers throughout the state of California. She couldn't remember his name, but he wore shorts and these big orange socks. Oh yeah, I know, Tom Gordon. Tom humbled me for a few times in one year that I had the honor of teaching with and learning from him. I was Al Japoni's student teacher, and Al was Tom's student teacher. So we used to joke that we had 3 generations of physics teachers at Science: grandpa, son, and grandson. I felt honored to carry on the tradition, teaching there for the next 30 years. From Bruce Lawrence, physics teacher at the Bronx Science, 1989 to 2018.
We'll again turn to the Psalm, Psalm 121. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See the protector of Israel, neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian, God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. Our next reflection, I'd like to bring up Lindsay Nitchie. Sorry, I got it close.
There are really no words to express both the magnitude of the loss of this great man and the impact he had on the lives of all he touched. Tom Gordon was an extraordinary teacher, and the physical science department at Bronx Science that he was a part of was a department of extraordinary teachers. His colleagues were Hall of Famers, each and every one of them, and among these outstanding educators, Tom was revered as the master, a master of masters, a once-in-a-lifetime unsurpassed giant in his field. I first met Tom at a convention of the American Association of Physics Teachers, for which he served as a workshop leader, teaching physics teachers from across the country how to make physics come alive for their students. Imagine a room filled with professional teachers of physics being challenged, stumped, and mesmerized as Tom presented one ingenious and motivational demonstration after another, many of which were his original creations. I'll never forget his giving us a pair of square polarizing filters that we all knew would block light when placed at the right angles to each other, but these didn't. None of us, in spite of our experience and knowledge, could figure out why. Then, with a twinkle in his eye, Tom would explain. That was the quintessential Tom Gordon, challenging and nurturing our ability to think out of the box and modeling how to teach at the highest level. When I was fortunate enough to become chairman of the physical science department at Bronx Science, I soon realized that Tom was the real head of the department. He was always the smartest guy in the room, the most creative, and the most humble. His colleagues looked up to him for inspiration and leadership and for support. I recall back in the 90s, Bronx Science had recognized for excellence of its teachers with a number of federal grants to train teachers from other cities and other countries. And I recall how proud I was to schedule Tom and how eager he was to open his classroom to the visiting delegations. Observing Tom's class was always the highlight for our visitors. So I'll always remember Tom for his unbelievable creativity and educational leadership, but I'll also remember the warmth and devotion and dedication and loyalty that he demonstrated every day of his life. He was a pure and noble soul who loved his craft, his students, and his colleagues. And that combination touched the core of every student who was fortunate enough to have called Tom Gordon his or her teacher, and every adult who had the fortune to call Tom our colleague and friend. Tom left his mark on us all, and we will always miss him, but never forget the incredible man that he was. Stanley Bloomstem, Principal, Bronx High School of Science, 1994 to 2000.
One of the central prayers that we offer in Judaism at a memorial service is called the Malle Rahamim, the prayer for the departed, it's often known. This is a prayer that we pray that the soul returns safely to its ancestors. We understand that Tom is on a journey right now, letting go of everything from his life, and part of it is actually our service today. By hearing our reflections, it helps him know that his time is ready and that he's ready to join his ancestors. I'd like to invite up David Gordon to recite this important prayer. This is generally done with everyone standing, so I invite you to rise.
El Malle Rahamim Shohen Bamromim Amitze Menucha Nechona Tahat Kanfer Shfina B'malot Kedoshim Utorim Kezohar Harakia Mahizrim L'nishmat Tamas shehalach leolamo beken tehem enuchato ana b'harahamim hastirehu b'seter knafeha leolamim Utzhor bitzrochaim et nishmato, Adonai hu nahalato, Vanuch beshalom al mishkavo, Venomar Amen.
You may be seated. We have another reflection, and let's see. I'm going to try, hopefully I get it right this time. Audrey Nitschy. Yeah. Close?
I am very, very sorry to learn of your dad's passing. I was with him as a physics teaching resource agent and a participant in the 1985 Woodrow Wilson Physics Institute, as well as a fellow member of the Physics Club. He was one of the leading members of the New York physics teaching community, and I consider myself fortunate to get him to present a workshop on the emerging field of electronics to the Physics Club in December of 1987. I hope you can realize from this that he was a strong influence in the field of physics education. John Roeder, Secretary-Treasurer of the Physics Club of New York. I knew your dad from a series of classes he taught for physics teachers at SUNY Purchase. I would attend at night when I should have been marking papers or relaxing just to listen to him. He will live on in my memory as long as I live. He was a most exceptional person and a physics teacher. My utmost condolences to you and the rest of your family. Drew Pankow. As a first-year chemistry teacher, I met your dad at SUNY Purchase in 1985 in his priceless role as a Woodrow Wilson master physics teacher. He taught me so much about what to teach, how to teach better, and what alternate ways to fine-tune my teaching methods for the students with different abilities. Like your dad, I used a lot of levity and puns to emphasize interesting facts and crucial concepts, which I wanted my students and colleagues to remember. Thank you, Marie, for the sad yet unfortunate yet necessary news about your dad. He will live on my memory for as long as I remain alive. Ben Darm.
I'd like to invite up Diane Gordon for a reading called Eulogy by Merritt, Molloy.
When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known and loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away.
For another reflection, I'd like to invite up Jessica Cuellar.
I taught physics at Bronx Science for 30 years, beginning in 1977. For most of that period, I was a colleague of your father. Tom was one of the most unique individuals I have ever met. He had a thirst for physics knowledge that was completely independent of the courses he taught and earned the highest respect of both students and teachers. In physics, he was the first resource of our department to solve the most difficult and esoteric problems. Always informal, he danced to his own tune and was commonly taken as the janitor, since he usually wore jeans, a t-shirt, and a conspicuous ring of keys. I marveled that he could teach AP Physics with calculus and 2 advanced physics courses all simultaneously without lesson plans, off the top of his head, and do it effectively every day. About 5 years before retiring, Tom won an arm wrestling contest against a very formidable opponent. Despite his large size, the result amazed me. Tom told me he could lift unusual amounts of weight. I challenged him to prove it, so we went down to the local Jackville Lane, which had a full circuit of the latest Nautilus equipment. I watched in utter disbelief as he calmly maxed out on every, and I do mean every, machine. For a few, he lifted the entire machine off the floor. That's something I will never forget. He was the smartest and the strongest teacher I ever encountered. The effects of his life are infinite. An untold number of former students in very high places will always remember him with fondness. From all of us at Bronx Science, including his closest pals, Jerry Holtzman and Al DiNapoli, both now deceased, goodbye, Tom, with warmest regards. Robert Budin, physics teacher at Bronx Science, 1977 to 2006.
There's a beautiful prayer called Tefillat Haderech, which means the prayer for a journey. And it's actually said anytime you go on a journey. There's a feeling when you go, when you leave, you don't know where you're going to go. This is a rendition that comes from Debbie Friedman that Cantor Frank will be reciting.
May we be blessed as we go on our way. May we be guided in peace. May we be blessed with health and joy. May this be a blessing. Amen. 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 May this be a blessing. Amen. May we be sheltered by the wings of peace. May we be kept in safety and in love. May grace and compassion find their way to every soul. May this be our blessing. Amen. 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 May this be a blessing. Amen. 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 May this be a blessing. Join with me. Amen.
I'd like to invite up David Gordon now as a speaker and as to offer a reflection. I'm sorry.
I am saddened to hear about the passing of Tom Gordon. By a long shot, he was my favorite and most influential teacher ever. I was in his first sophomore honors physics class back in 1976. Tom never could control the class, letting us run wild with flying spitballs, paper airplanes, and general chaos. One day, the principal, Dr. Taffel, walked in with his eyes looking as if they were about to pop out of his sockets. He was clearly mortified by what he saw. Years later, I heard from Tom that after the class, Taffel scolded him for his inability to control us. But Tom stood up to him and said, "These are smart kids and they need space to learn." Needless to say, Dr. Taffel was not impressed. Imagine trying to argue that classroom chaos is just what's needed to help kids learn. He told Tom that we better perform or there would be serious consequences. A lot was riding on us to perform well. At the time, New York State had an end-of-the-year exam in each subject called the Regents. Maybe it still does. I don't remember exactly what Tom did to prepare us, but I do remember walking into the Regents exam knowing for certain I'd get 100. And I did, as well as 7 other students in the class, versus only 3 in the entire rest of the school. From that day forward, Tom had free rein to teach any way he pleased. Maybe it was chaos, but whatever it was sure worked. He was a most remarkable teacher with a deep passion for the profession. I went off to MIT to study physics and then to Berkeley for a PhD. While many of the professors knew more physics than Tom, when it came to the sheer influence of setting me on a path of learning and understanding, no one held a candle to him. Today, I'm a theoretical physicist working on the theory of gravitational waves and black holes. It's been quite a journey, but I know exactly who set me on this path and where it began, in the flying spitballs and chaos of Tom Gordon's very first sophomore physics class. That was V. Byrne, director at the Manny Baumek Institute for Theoretical Physics at UCLA.
And now to offer the eulogy, I'd like to invite up Walter Gordon.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I thought I would, but I don't know after all that. I think you probably all read the description of my father's life in the program that we wrote. Actually, Diane wrote most of that. I wrote a little bit of it. I just want to fill in some gaps that aren't in there. One story, he was very fond of saying, you read that his mother left my father and his father when he was only 10 months old, and my grandfather, Bill, had to move around a lot to work, to support them. And one of the jobs that he took when my father was only 3 or 3.5 years old was to work at a farm near Port Jervis, New York, to convert the farm into a day camp. So my grandpa Bill was working installing tanks and plumbing and whatever. He was a plumber, so whatever could be required to turn this farm into a day camp, and he could not watch my father. So he had given my father a dog, a puppy that grew into a dog named Puff. And every day while my grandfather was working, my father and Puff would just wander off into the woods around the farm and the camp and do whatever. And eventually, my father would fall asleep next to the dog for the afternoon. And when my grandfather was done working, he would walk into the woods and yell, "Tom, Tom," and Puff would bark. And then my grandfather knew where to walk to and find my father sleeping next to his dog. He told this to us many, many times, and I'm quite certain it's true. It was just the two of them. It was just the two of them. From all these physics stories you heard, you might assume he always wanted to study physics and he always wanted to be a physics teacher. Actually, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a physics teacher. It was my favorite subject, and obviously I went off in another direction. But when my father started college, he actually wanted to be a veterinarian, not a physics teacher. He wanted to go to the Cornell School of Veterinary Medicine and study to be a vet. But turned out my grandfather had lost his job as that was getting ready to happen, and they couldn't afford to send him. So he just finished his bachelor in physics and became a physics teacher, which obviously changed his life and the life of many other people. He was extremely handy. When we bought our house in 1963, it was about 5 years old at the time when we moved from the Bronx to White Plains, and the house was mostly finished, but not completely, and the yard wasn't finished at all. My father, with a little help from his father and his father-in-law, they finished the upstairs bedroom. They built a huge garden in the yard. They dug it out and they sifted the dirt manually through sieves to get out the rocks and sticks and roots and so forth. He built cinder block walls, a concrete patio, a covered porch. It was amazing. It was amazing. I mean, it wasn't the finest quality work. You wouldn't say he was an artisan, but it was good enough, and he just did it. He had the drive and the determination that, let me tell you, does not exist in this body. He even turned, our first car was a 63 Ford Econoline van, and he turned that into a camper. It came without seats, and he built seats that folded into beds. And we actually went camping for many years in that van up at Fonstock State Park, just north of the city, in this van that he constructed himself. Extremely, extremely fond memories. Robert Boudin talked about how strong he was. The Nautilus gig was a thing that he got hooked on later in life. He was really obsessed with Nautilus equipment and maxing out on it. I remember that quite clearly. But when I was young, he was into this thing called jogging. And you may say, what's the big deal? But in the 60s, in the mid to late 60s, people did not run for fun. They just didn't. I have an article here from the New York Times Magazine, April 14th, 1968, talking about this thing. Jogging is an in sport. And I'm just going to give you an example here. Running through the streets near his home one late afternoon after work, Dick Cordier was halted by a squad car. "You've just got yourself a ticket," growled the policeman inside. "What for?" protested Cordier. "Illegal use of the highway by a pedestrian." That's how unusual it was to run in 1968, and my father did it all the time. I would often go with him, but being 8 years old, I could not keep up. I would ride my bicycle as he ran. But an avid runner when people just did not do that sort of thing. He loved the beach. Before we got our travel trailer and went camping during the summer, since he was a teacher, he got the summers off, we would go to Jones Beach. People who are familiar with the city, it's out on Long Island. The population of Jones Beach on a summer day is probably 1 million people. Am I exaggerating, Barry? Yeah, probably 1 million people, Jones Beach during the summer. And my father loved it. We would go out there, we would leave at 6:30 in the morning to get a good parking spot because the beach would fill up, and we would sit out all day on a blanket and just burn to a crisp because no one had sunscreen, sunblock back then. My father would bring a little charcoal grill, a little metal thing, and cook hot dogs and hamburgers for us at lunchtime on the sand. And he would sculpt, we called them sandwiches. He would sculpt nude women in the sand. And he was actually pretty good at it. He was actually pretty good at it. It got a lot of attention. But he loved going to the beach, and we did it very often. He loved to sail. When I was very young, he bought a little Philippine mahogany sailboat about 10 feet long. You could row it, you could motor it, you could also sail it. And he would sail it all over the place. He told me a story. I don't actually remember this happening, but he said he was sailing it in Long Island Sound, and a storm blew in, and the water started to get extremely rough. And he was a little concerned, so he told me to go up to the front of the boat and wrap my arms around the mast while he maneuvered to not capsize and get us back to shore. And he said while he was doing this, that a Coast Guard boat came up to us and said, "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" And he said, no, we're okay." And he sailed the boat back to the shore. I have no memory of that, but I heard the story many, many times. Once we had our high-low travel trailer, we used to go camping all over the Northeast and the Maritime provinces in Canada. We spent several summers on Prince Edward Island, where we were actually there at this one campground most of the summer. And one of my signature memories of back then is my father just getting in the sailboat and disappearing in the bay that near where we were camping, and would just be gone for hours alone in the sailboat. And I never really understood that. What was he doing? But then, I don't know, when did we get the sailboat? Around 1990, 95? I bought a little Sunfish fiberglass sailboat and learned to sail and sailed it myself around Western New York. And I finally appreciated what he was doing, to just be propelled just by the wind, nothing but the wind and the waves. It had a beauty all its own. And I learned to understand what he appreciated during those days at PEI. That boat is still in my parents' house, and I hope to bring it back to Western New York and get it refurbished and start sailing myself again. He was extremely proud of his children. he would tell stories about all of us. My sister Marie is retired Navy. She worked a number of different positions in the Navy. One of them was in the Department of the Navy, the Chief Information Officer. And at that time, she was responsible for the Navy perspective, the Navy responsibility for an overhaul of the human resources systems in the Department of Defense. There was a system called DIMERS that was competing with a system in the Marines called McTIFs. I don't even understand what they are, but my father talked to my sister Marie so much about it and was so proud of what she was doing. He would lecture people about DIMERS and McTIFs. The Marines don't want to give up McTIFs because it's theirs, but DIMERS is better, all from talking to my sister. My sister Lorraine, you read in the program, she became a physics teacher. She still is, teaching physics in Florida, in Jupiter, Florida. She received a presidential award, the highest recognition you can get for a physics teacher. She was also a national board certified physics teacher. These are national level recognitions, and my father could not have been prouder of what his daughter was doing. My sister Stephanie, she has worked quality control at a number of pharmaceutical companies. She's a PhD chemie, and he would tell stories about her, about how the time there was extremely fine glass found in one of the pharmaceuticals, which was actually inconsequential for the design application of the drug. I don't remember what it was, but whatever you were supposed to do with it, this microscopic glass was irrelevant. However, doctors were prescribing it off the primary use as something that could be injected into the eyes. And Stephanie said, we can't accept this. This was millions of dollars worth of drug. And Stephanie said, we can't accept this. Her bosses said, why? The glass doesn't make any difference. And she says, but it does when they use it off-label. And they were really ticked about it, but when it was taken up to the higher-ups in Switzerland, they stood by my sister. And I probably heard my father tell that story half a dozen times. So far as me, he used to tell the story how in 1989, before the invasion of Panama, that I was on a C-130 mission to Panama, and since this was just 6 months prior to the US invasion of Panama, that I was there to scope out the country and provide intelligence for the subsequent invasion. The only thing about that story is it's completely not true. He made it up. I did go to Panama 6 months before the invasion, but it was basically to just haul guys and bananas around. Had nothing to do with the upcoming invasion at all. I just want to finish with a reading of my own. This has been very hard for me, harder than I expected it to be. I second-guessed myself. I second-guessed some decisions that I made before he went into the hospital, and wondered if he would still be with us if those decisions were different. And I came across this passage. I was looking for things online, and it provided some comfort to me, both the words and the source, and I think my father would be proud to have me read this here, and I think he would agree with what it says. This is reflections by a man who recently lost his wife of 5 years. He was only married for 5 years. I took a little walk outside for a while. I was surprised that I wasn't feeling what I thought people were supposed to feel under the circumstances. Maybe I was fooling myself. I wasn't delighted, but I didn't feel terribly upset, perhaps because we had known for a long time that it was going to happen. It's hard to explain. If a Martian, who, we'll imagine, never dies except by accident, came to Earth and saw this peculiar race of creatures, these humans who live about 70 or 80 years knowing that death is going to come, it would look like a terrible problem of psychology to live under those circumstances, knowing that life is only temporary. Well, we humans somehow figure out how to live despite this problem. We laugh, we joke, we live. The only difference for me and Susan was, instead of 50 years, it was 5 years. It was only a quantitative difference. The psychological problem was just the same. The only way it would have become any different is if we had said to ourselves, but those other people have it better because they might live 50 years. But that's crazy. Why make yourself miserable saying things like, why do we have such bad luck? What has God done to us? What have we done to deserve this? All of which, if you understand reality and take it completely into your heart, are irrelevant and unsolvable. They are just things that nobody can know. We had a hell of a good time together. Richard Feynman. Thank you.
Walter wanted me to say that Richard Feynman was a PhD, a Nobel Peace Award-winning one who in physics. So that's why his father would have particularly appreciated what he had written. The service today has been a labor of love by Walter and the family to really give words to an incredible life. Someone who didn't know Tom, I am just in awe of all that he was able to do. I think we aspire to be teachers, but so few of us can do that. It really takes a particular type of person to not only be a teacher, but a teacher's teacher. And what a beautiful thing that he offered to the world. When you do that, the wisdom that he imparted to so many teachers over the world, over the years, including his children, will continue to reverberate and reverberate and reverberate, and so that he never fully dies. He's always with us. We're going to conclude with one of our most important prayers. It's called the Mourner's Kaddish. I'm going to invite you to rise again. The prayer itself has nothing to do with death. It's about a sanctification of God's name. It's something we've been saying in the Jewish community for over 1,000 years in memorial to people that have died. And we offer it today. It has no melody, and it's usually said in the first year of someone's passing. And it also will be said in future years on the anniversary of that person's death, as well as important holidays and other moments when we're thinking about them. The rabbis understood that grief is ongoing. And as much as we would hope that the wound just heals, it doesn't heal quite like that, but that we need markers. And that's what this prayer provides. A little like physics, I guess. So we'll say this, those of you familiar. If you're not, no worries. It's easy to find on the web. Just write Mourner's Kaddish, transliteration if you don't speak Hebrew, and that's a way to honor Tom as well. Yitgadal, v'yitkadash, shemei rabbah. V'yalma, divrach, chirutei, v'yamlik malchutei. V'chayachon, v'yamachon, v'chayed, v'chol beit Yisrael. V'agalav yizman kariv, yimru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah, v'varach, le'olam l'be'om ayah. Yitbarak, v'yishtabak, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitramam, v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei d'kudashah, b'rechu. Le'la min kol berchata v'shirata, tush berchata v'nechamata, damiran b'yalma, v'yimru amen. Yehi shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'yimru amen. Osa shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'yimru amen. May God grant peace to Tom, to all those who mourn, and comfort all the bereaved among us, and provide peace in this world. We say amen. This concludes our service today. I think we're going to be moving out that way. Joanne, how do we exit? Oh. Okay, Joanne's right over there, so just follow her over there. And we're really, on behalf of the family, thank you for coming. It's been an honor for us to host, and we know that Tom's memory will continue to be a blessing for many, many years to come.
Everyone who has the time and the inclination is invited back to our house afterwards for some dessert. If you don't know where it is, most of you do, see us.